Can't get enough of Kelly and Ramya?
We're now on YouTube for you to indulge in highlights from our show. The Canadian wildfire season, it can be unpredictable to begin with, but this year it is definitely unprecedented also. And we're going to be speaking to Dr. Christine Korol, psychologist, registered psychologist and director of the Vancouver Anxiety Center. You're coming to us, Doctor, with tips on dealing with the wildfire season from a mental health perspective. So lots to chat about here, and thank you for joining the show.
Thank you for having me on today.
So let's, first of all, start with you. You're doing a lot of work around this. Can you kind of give us some background and context on the work and yourself as a psychologist?
Well, here in BC, we've been dealing with forest fires for many, many years, and I would see in my patients that it was affecting their mental health. People were feeling down about the fires. I was seeing a lot of anxious people anyway, so they were worrying about other things. So this was one more thing that they were starting to worry about. But as I did more research and reading into the effect of wildfire smoke on people's mental health, it's not just that it's depressing to look out in the skies, but the particulate actually can affect your mood as well.
So what kinds of effects do the wildfires have on people's mental health?
Well, a lot of the particulate that you breathe in can, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It can lead to feelings of depression and anxiety. And not only do people have trouble breathing, which can also affect how anxious you feel. Your heart has to work harder, which a lot of people will interpret as anxiety as well. Plus, it's just sad to think about what's happening to the forest. So there's many different layers. And then if you're someone who's in an evacuation zone, then you have the worry and trauma of possibly you're losing everything in a forest fire.
We often talk about, not being ready for natural disasters, or if you don't live in a zone where you have to constantly be thinking about that. Like, as an example, I live in Toronto. We're not thinking about hurricanes and tornadoes regularly and even, other aspects like that, right? But now it feels like these wildfires are top of mind for many of us. And some of us are still going through the, oh my gosh, like, how do I even respond to or react to these things? Do we even know how to go about thinking about this? So what kind of impacts are you seeing in 2023 in regards to this?
Well, out here on the West Coast, we certainly have been dealing with this a lot longer. So I would say most of the people I know have air purifiers in their homes now. We're making good use of N95s that we had. Thankfully, Vancouver and I'm in Victoria today are fairly clear and the weather's nice. But you know that could change at any time. So we get used to watching the reports, not just for the weather, but also for air quality as well. So you have to be prepared, and it's a new normal for us here in the summers. A lot of people change their vacations. I had to cancel a trip to Montreal, or I decided to cancel a trip to Montreal. That's where I was supposed to be this week. So sadly, I decided to avoid some of that air quality. I have asthma, so not a good choice for me. So it means a lot of last minute plans and being flexible and being able to change things. So we're going to have to find a deep place of acceptance for what's happening in the world and learn to live with that. So we're just a few years ahead of you here in BC, but I hear a lot of my friends in Toronto and Montreal say the same sort of things to me that we were saying at the beginning when we seem to have fires every summer. So talk to a West Coast friend.
Yeah, I happen to live next door to West Coast people, and they say, "Oh, we're used to this. Our lungs are made out of leather now." And
No, they're not.
no, they aren't. And I've really noticed that there is a mental health issue that people really feel the anxiety and also the depression because coming out of COVID, people were wearing masks, and they were wearing masks when they went inside. Now they're wearing masks when they go outside.
Yes.
What do you recommend for people to prepare for wildfire season if it is going to be with us from now on?
Well, flexibility. A lot of the same tools that I'm using with my patients are the same tools that we would use for any kind of situation where you can't control things. Like if you have cancer, for example, using mindfulness and acceptance, learning how to not catastrophize, how to talk yourself down, to trust on your resilience and ability to cope. These are all things that I work on with my patients, depending on the kinds of fears that they have. and what they're worrying about specifically. So, there could be 5 people worrying about the forest fires, and one person's worrying about their home, another's worrying more broadly about climate change, another might be worrying just because their mental health is declining because of the air pollution. So you don't assume that everyone has the same worries, and you can work. If you're finding you can't sleep or you can't stop worrying, then it can be a good idea to see a mental health professional who can teach you some of these coping skills as well, if you're really struggling.
And I'm curious about that in and of itself. Are people talking about the mental health effects of the wildfires? Are a lot of us still like, just thinking about the physical effects, but not understanding the long-term and the anxiety and the day-to-day of, because we're coming off the heels of the pandemic also, right? There's so much that we're affected by that's basically compounding, in my opinion.
Well, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I'm trying to remember, the American Psychological Association put out a great publication for therapists on how to treat climate anxiety and climate change worries, and great suggestions for therapists. I've been seeing more and more therapists interested in this, but now there's more surveys coming out. I think it was Pew Research Center that did another survey showing about 3/4 of Americans are worrying about climate change. So it's certainly increasing. And then events like this bring it home, where people are like, oh, I can't just ignore this. It's in my back door now. And we're going to see these huge fires more and more regularly. So what's our plan to mitigate some of this? What are some new things that we have to do? Do we change how we build and create fire resistant, airtight dwelling spaces? It's going to change so many aspects of how we live. And we're going to have to try and figure this out, how to survive in a climate where things seem to be getting bleaker and bleaker.
Yeah, because I think
scary.
It is scary. And I think that people also assume, well, everything's going to go back to normal, whatever they think normal is, but it doesn't necessarily go back to normal. And people who are directly affected by the wildfires, they can experience grief. What are some ways to deal with those emotions?
Well, like any loss, you have to allow yourself time to be sad. Actually, this is a question that I get asked, is how do you be happy in the midst of all of this, or if you lose your home to a fire? And there really isn't any way. It's about letting yourself feel sad, letting yourself feel that grief, talking to someone if you need to. Talking can help us process some of those feelings. If, however, you have trauma, so you have, in the first 30 days after an accident or a big loss, sometimes it's actually a better idea not to talk about it, because that can create PTSD. So one of the things we know, that's the only time you'll see a cognitive behavioral therapist kind of zip our lips. Someone comes into me within that 30-day window after an immediate trauma, I'll usually tell them to do something distracting, to try to not talk about it. If they have to make police reports or insurance reports, keep it to that. Try not to tell family members over and over again. We know repeating that story can actually lead to an increased incidence of PTSD. And so it's normal to feel and have intrusive thoughts, nightmares, all of that in the 30 days after a trauma. After that, if it continues, then go see a therapist who can help you. But something like 97% of people recover spontaneously if you leave it alone and don't intervene too quickly, actually. And those are some of the guidelines for the American Cognitive Therapy Association. They recommend not treating trauma, letting people bring people food, take care of their physical needs. I usually set people up with a plan for different distractions they can use, especially distractions that will interfere with the intrusive images that might come in. So those would be sort of critical trauma care after a forest fire takes your home, or if you're struggling with a trauma after loss. It could be any kind of natural disaster in your area where you would want to be cautious with that. But certainly I've been consulting with a lot of people in Nova Scotia who've been dealing with this for the first time. I've been doing this in BC. There's some great organizations here in BC that deal with disaster response. So psychologists are just deployed to different centers and making sure people get good trauma care in the immediate aftermath. So it's definitely hard. But after that period, it's realizing, anything that is a structure or it's impermanent. Nothing lasts forever. And at some point we have to grieve these losses. But when it's ripped from us in a traumatic way, we need a little extra care and attention to adjust to the new reality.
And as you've been pointing out, the way that we get that care and support initially probably makes a huge difference on the person being affected, right? So, you know, unintentionally, we can potentially make things worse for ourselves or worse for people around us. But I'm curious about this. We talked a lot about what I'm assuming adults and how we're processing wildfires and our neighbors are processing wildfires. But how about kids? I'm sure there's a huge difference or many differences in how kids are coping through wildfires. How do we explain climate change? How do we explain forest fires to kids and wildfires and then, you know, deal with it?
Well, it's really hard. It depends on the developmental level of the child. So if we're talking preschoolers, it can be a good idea to turn the television off because it's too easy for them to misunderstand what's being said on TV. They might hear older siblings or adults talk about climate change. So just be important to make sure everyone in the household knows that, you know, little ears don't always understand everything. So, you know, be careful how you talk about these things. We don't want it to be overly scary. And then if your child does seem worried or concerned about climate change, find out why they're worried. They might not be worried about what you think. They might not be thinking, you know, a mass extinction event in the world. They might be thinking more that they're sad that they can't go to the park today because of all the smoke and when are they going to see the sun again. So ask questions and find out what they're actually worried about. Keep TV to a minimum and routines and fun activities high. So preschoolers respond really well to distraction and playing games. They have a very strong drive to play, so that can really help a preschooler. When we get to middle school, and kids are starting to ask good questions, they're starting to develop critical thinking skills. And that's when they ask the tough questions that parents don't always know the answer to. And you don't have to know the answer to it. You can start conversations. I often talk to a lot of teachers, and teachers are trained in a technique called guided discovery or Socratic education. And so if you want to Google that and learn a little bit more about that, it's basically a series of asking questions to help kids develop a better understanding and go find the information from trusted sources themselves. So instead of saying, oh, that'll never happen, because kids have a high BS detector. They know when you're lying to them. And so it's best not to try and just reassure them and tell them everything's okay and say, oh, I don't know. Let's check and see what we can do about that. And what do you think a good solution to that would be? And so learning to ask these questions, find out what they're worried about, and then engage them in discovery. But yeah, once a kid gets to about 10, you can't fool them anymore. I mean, they have access to computers. They can Google some pretty scary stuff. So you want to teach them what are the good sources. The Canadian government actually has some good resources for kids as well that you can use that talk about climate change and what's happening, where they can ask good questions. And then when you get to older teens, they can worry about different things. They're worried about their future. They're worried about whether they could have children. They worry about or have a lot of anger at adults who haven't fixed this yet. So what can help them if they're feeling a lot of despair? And this is certainly Greta Thunberg's story, that she decided she's feeling very depressed about the climate and decided to take action. So feeling like you're not passive, that there are solutions to getting through this and maybe even mitigating some of the ill effects that we're seeing. Not feeling powerless in the face of this can be really great for teens and young adults.
This is
to feel like they're part of the solution.
Yes, yes. And it's such important, you know, all the different things, the suggestions that you give, like asking questions, figuring it out together, because especially when adults, we might come from that perspective of resentment to begin with, and, oh, I can't wait to go back to that normal that I knew. Again, going back to pandemic parallels, we've experienced that for sure, and there's that trickle-down effect to how children and teens process that information and our responses. Doctor, thank you so much. This has been really a valuable conversation with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having this important conversation. It helps a lot of people talking about it.
Thanks for watching.
You can catch Kelly and Ramya weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern on AMI.